Self-propelled, when talking about artillery, means that the howitzer doesn't need another vehicle to move it into position. Not exactly like Belarus is showing here. You better go get that thing. That's 3.5 tons just sliding across the parking lot. Of course, the curb is going to end up being the thing stopping it, right? I mean, all things considered, that could have been a lot worse. And with the Belarusian military parade out of the way, today we've got videos showing dual anti-tank guided missiles. It's kind of a unique setup, never seen it before. The Russian BMD-4 and thermobaric rockets being used against a trench line in Ukraine. This is Hezbollah's not really new, old stuff here, but kind of put together in a new way, anti-tank guided missile system called the Thar Allah. So what you're seeing are 2 Cornet anti-tank guided missiles on one control unit. And they're firing back to back. They're engaging the same target. These aren't 2 different targets they're going after. The reason for this, what it seems like the reason for this, is that a lot of modern armored vehicles have something called explosive reactive armor. And when the way that works is when it's struck, it detonates and kind of pushes a blast back towards the anti-armor warhead. So when you fire one round against the side of the tank, if that ERA works effectively like it should, it's going to reduce the likelihood of any sort of penetration of the actual armor. The way these work is that they impact really back to back, just a split second between, and they'll show that here in a second. So if that first missile, sets off the ERA, in just a fraction of a second later, the second missile is able to punch right through and have, full effects on target. Now, these are laser-guided ATGMs, so I guess they found a way to somehow have, the same laser designator from the control unit tied in to both of those missiles at the same time. The idea of trying to do this with a wire-guided missile is just, I don't know that that's going to happen. Having 2 guys try to fly them back to back, or 1 guy with the same control unit, not really going to happen. You can see these 2 are, like 10 meters apart flying through the air. I mean, at first glance, you really can only see one I feel like I saw 2 detonations there. Yeah, if you look really closely, you can see 1-2 flashes. It's an interesting idea. I mean, it uses twice the ATGMs, but, use what you have, I guess. Here comes the first one, the second one. God, yeah, they are right on top of each other. And look at that, the bottom left, you can see it kind of punching through the actual tank. So that second warhead is having the desired effects. I could see the argument to use a cheaper warhead, something that's not as expensive as an anti-tank guided missile, to be the first thing to kind of set off the ERA. The challenge there is, and the benefit to this kind of system, where it could actually be pretty effective against modern tanks, is if that first munition, whatever it might be, an RPG or something, strikes a little further to the front of the vehicle and sets off the ERA there, that doesn't translate to the rest of the vehicle. So you see these bricks of explosive reactive armor. One doesn't set them all off at the same time. So it's usually more than just one that goes off. A couple of the surrounding ones might detonate as well. But if that second warhead or that second munition isn't coming right on that exact same path, you run the risk of just striking essentially 2 different parts of the vehicle, setting off 2 different portions of the ERA, and not really achieving the effects you're going for by firing one of these missiles right on top of the other. All right, here we've got a Russian BMD-4 with the crew just all riding out on top. I saw a video recently, I don't know if it was a Russian or a Ukrainian tank, thinking back, but like this, they've got 4, 5, 6 guys sitting on top of the vehicle, and it was attacked by some sort of loitering munition. You can see kind of the last second before it impacted, some of the soldiers trying to jump off the tank. They didn't get off the tank. I don't know if they were, ended up being killed or wounded or made it out of there safely. But it raises, there's an interesting issue here in this current war. There's so many mines on the battlefield and so many anti-tank guided missiles, and then you added in all the loitering munitions and danger from the air. What's the best place to be in an armored vehicle? If you're a passenger, would you rather be inside and potentially get stuck if it rolls over a mine, or disabled by an FPV and, burned to death on the inside of the vehicle? Or would you rather be on the outside and, maybe can get away if that kind of thing happens, but also you're entirely exposed to small arms fire, any sort of artillery, or you're, like that video, maybe catching the actual FPV yourself, which, it's not a good day. But anyways, these BMD-4s are essentially BMPs, right? For all intents and purposes, it's a BMP. It's just the airborne version. So it tends to come with a little less armor, a little lighter, and can be dropped via parachute. So there'd be certain rig points on this thing to allow it to be pushed out the back of an airplane if need be. The main weapon on these things is actually kind of unique. So it's a 100 millimeter rifled low pressure cannon, which is, it's a little bit different. It's really designed for direct fire. It can reach targets out to around 6 kilometers. You'll see this thing kind of aiming up a little bit higher, kind of trying to be an artillery piece in a sense. This would be about as effective in indirect fire as a tank. Like, yes, the rounds will go out that far, and yes, the rounds will eventually hit the ground, but this is designed as a direct fire weapon system. Now, the 100 millimeter shells that they're using are actually, a little bit lighter, not as big of an explosion, not as big of a charge as you would see in previous 100 millimeter rounds. So it is somewhat of a unique round specific for this cannon, this low pressure cannon. I don't know. I remember at one point we were thinking there were going to be T-55s all over the battlefield. I don't remember now if they've actually been out there, if it's all just been kind of joking propaganda. But the T-55 did come with or at least a model, the T-55, came with a 100 millimeter cannon. That munition was able to reach out to 14, 15 kilometers by comparison. And that was full. That was a high pressure cannon, the traditional cannon that you might find on a tank. So by comparison, the 100 millimeter cannon here, same size round, is less than half of that. So all things considered, the BMD is not a bad vehicle, not a bad weapon system when you're talking about, maybe adding firepower to an infantry unit or supporting infantry units in the fight. I mean, in addition to the 100 millimeter gun, they've got a 30 millimeter autocannon and usually an RPK and or PKM mounted somewhere on the vehicle. I don't think I'd want to be in this thing if it was taking on enemy tanks or even infantry fighting vehicles, but from the Russian point of view, who are the sole operators of the BMD, it's not a bad method to add a little extra firepower to an assaulting infantry force. The TOS-1 flamethrower, which I still think is a weird name for it, was originally designed to take on enemy fortifications and bunkers where the thermobaric nature of that warhead would allow the explosion and the concussion to kind of, expand into all areas where shrapnel might not otherwise reach. I really haven't heard anything about how effective or ineffective, maybe, these thermobaric warheads have been against trench lines in the open. So, all across Ukraine right now, there's trenches from the north, the east, all the way across the south, on both sides, Russian and Ukrainian trenches. And, to be fair, both Russia and Ukraine have these TOS-1 thermobaric multiple launch rocket systems. Pretty sure the video here is Russian, just the Telegram channel that shared it tends to be pretty pro-Russian. But when you look at these trench lines all across Ukraine, you'll see that they're not a straight line. They used to be at a time. At the very start of the war, you'd see some trenches from 2014 kind of set back from the front that were pretty straight. But as this war has progressed, the innovations in the trench have picked up, and they tend to be more jagged. And there's a lot of dugout positions and underground positions where the troops can take cover from artillery fire. But one of the reasons for those jagged trenches is, that the earth between you and the next position, if a round were to land directly in the trench, traditional 155 or 152 millimeter high explosive round, it's not going to be able to punch through the dirt to affect, your buddy in the next position over. Whereas if it was a straight line and a round landed in that trench, it could, kill everybody in a 10, 15, 20 meter stretch. I don't know what that looks like with thermobaric warheads. I think it would do the same thing like it would in a building, where the thermobaric warhead releases this cloud of gas and then detonates, and in turn kind of sucks the oxygen out of what would be a room or a bunker and pushes that concussion and the explosion into all the little, under the desk, around the corner, into the closet, all types of areas where you're not going to be able to take cover from it. I feel like that should work for a trench line as well. That the challenge here is that in a building, it's relatively enclosed, whereas in the trench line, it's generally pretty open. So a lot of the blast could dissipate up, and I don't know if it tends to have the same, desired effects of spreading through that trench line like you would expect inside of a building. I mean, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near one of these things when they detonate. It's a pretty, it's an effective but pretty nasty weapon system. My question more is, does the thermobaric nature of that blast kind of trace the trench line and get down into the dugout positions, or does it dissipate up and away? So if you hear anything about that, I'd be interested in learning more. But that's all I got for now. Be sure to check out the national security sit reps I put out on Substack if interested. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.